Good morning, everyone. This is Jenny Allen from WICHE. We are an interstate compact, and we work with our 16 member states and territories to expand access and excellence in higher education. I am thrilled to be able to introduce you to Ari Garcia from the Wyoming Department of Health and Tamara Sale from the ESA Center for Excellence at Portland State University. Ari is our state planner in Wyoming, and she commissioned this series of webinars. This is our fourth and final one, so please do think of any questions that you'd like to ask. There will be contact information at the end of the webinar if you need to email anybody directly. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please use the chat box, and I will try and get those answered for you. So with that, I would like to introduce Ari Garcia from Wyoming Department of Health, the Behavioral Health Division. Ari?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm happy to be on this webinar. I'm sad that it's the last one that we're going to see because it's all been really good information so far and really interesting, and so I'm kind of sad it's coming to an end on this side. But yeah, I'll be talking a little bit later in the webinar about where we're at with the mental health block grant 10% set-aside funding as far as, implementing a first episode psychosis program in Wyoming. And, yeah, and with, with that said, I think I'll just turn it over to Tamara.
Great, thank you. There we go, my screen to advance. Hi, everybody. This is Tamara, and Ryan will not be joining us today. He had something that came up that is preventing him from being able to join us. I do want to mention again that we do have continuing education social work credits available for this call. And so we will send out a certificate to folks who participate. If you just fill in your evaluations and make sure we have your email addresses. So as Ari was saying, this is our last webinar, and I've really enjoyed starting to get to know folks. I'm really excited at the idea of early psychosis intervention starting to take hold in Wyoming, and the focus of the conversation today is really around how to start to build the kind of system for early psychosis in Wyoming. I know Ari's going to talk a little bit about the current request for applications that went out, and obviously that's going to be an important first step. But regardless, there are a number of things that communities can do and that you can do statewide. Today on the call, what I was hoping to do is to walk through some thought processes and actually to open the conversation up to you all to do some brainstorming, talking about kind of who are some of the champions and the related efforts that we can build off of, and then just looking again at what the different pieces are of early psychosis intervention and how those things can happen in more of a rural community. I'll share a few observations that we've learned from working with different rural communities about the things that seem to actually really make it take hold, that are things that you could do, and then also talking about what you could do to start moving things in that direction, whether or not you have any additional money, because a lot of this is about awareness and where we put our attention. And then finally, talking about what are some of the next steps, both from Ari's perspective and then also from people's perspective around the state. So with that, I'm going to ask for Jenny's help because she can kind of see who's on the line and I can't, but I wanted to just do a quick round robin and throw out the question of, based on what you know about Wyoming and who you know in Wyoming, what would you say are, who do you see out there that would be natural champions around this, who are already invested or maybe paying the price for what's not happening, and then also, are there some existing efforts in Wyoming that you could see this really tying into? So, Jenny, if you could call on folks and just kind of see who's on the line.
Sure.
And if you could introduce yourself first and then give your thoughts.
So we have a question from Janet. Partners, Wyoming Suicide Coalition, Prevention Management Organization. That's where Janet is from. Nikki is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Ombudsman. I think rural community health providers are big champions for moving these discussions forward. Janet is mentioning assorted health organizations like Wyoming Rural Health.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, we'll take the responses that people are typing into the chat box, and we will compile a little list to help us get started.
Oh, and I apologize, Janet. The Wyoming Suicide Coalition and Prevention Management Organization are some ideas of partners. Mm-hmm. She's actually from the Behavioral Health Division.
Any other suggestions?
Oh, Nikki is saying, what about the VA? And Janet is mentioning Title 25 partners.
That's great. So I don't know, Jody, Gina, Elizabeth, Angela, Joanna, I don't know if you guys have any suggestions about partners or existing efforts.
Let's see, Janet is also mentioned crisis intervention team partners and schools.
Right. That's great. So one of the things that we often encourage in the beginning is to try to pull together a coalition of people representing some of these different perspectives to share the goals that you're trying to accomplish through this effort, and to look at ways that those different groups can help you. So definitely the crisis folks and the suicide prevention folks and the schools, all those folks can really help you both with getting the word out about early identification, helping to make referrals, maybe kind of shifting some of the practices, educating themselves, and then just being partners in terms of supporting the kids as we are identifying them. So feel free as you come up with other ideas to go ahead and enter those into the chat box, and that'll help form the basis for the next stage of conversation with Ari and the folks who are getting the process started in the state. So just to remind us of how many people we're talking about, because you guys have a population of about 500,000 across your whole state, that means that you could expect that you're going to have about 50 new people developing psychosis consistent with schizophrenia on an annual basis. So it's a large enough number to be concerned, and it's a small enough number that you can really kind of figure out who they are and wrap appropriate services around them. Depending on how you decide to kind of draw the line around who you're going to focus on, there are a variety of causes of psychosis, and so if you really open up the spectrum to other types of psychosis, you could go as high as just over 100 per year. And of course, we know that across the whole population of Wyoming, the prevalence rate, or the number of folks who will have schizophrenia at some point in their lifetime is about 3,500. So it's not an uncommon condition, but it's a small enough number of people that you can really make a difference. So I just wanted to walk through again real quickly what some of the most important things are in getting a program going. At the at the local level as well as at the state level, having really good senior level buy-in is very, very important. So, for communities that might be wanting to jump into this, you might have a clinician who's really excited about it. One of the first steps would be to have a conversation with the director, or the folks who are making those kinds of decisions, to introduce them to why you would want to do this. And it does become very, very important that people at that level are invested. So in the state of Oregon, the reason that we've been as successful as we have been is that we started off with 5 counties where the directors of the agencies were all invested in making it work. And then we had a managed care, a mental health managed care organization where the director also was invested. And then ultimately, the thing that laid the groundwork for our statewide dissemination was that the director of mental health for the state became very committed to it. So those folks have been able to really get rid of a lot of the barriers that we might have dealt with otherwise, to support us kind of going beyond the normal parameters. For example, when we first started out, we were just a Medicaid organization, but we wanted to serve the whole population, so we had to go after grant money and basically define the program in a way that went beyond the normal criteria for who was served, and we were supported in doing that because of the nature of the program. So having that senior level of buy-in became very, very important. Also, being able to be flexible, so things like doing the outreach, being able to meet during kind of out of evening or weekend hours, and making sure that the supervisor is really on board again and really supporting the clinicians in doing the work, so that when it comes time for performance evaluations, that they're not getting punished based on a set of criteria that's inconsistent with what you're trying to do with the program. And then finally, in terms of the management and the senior level buy-in, having those folks available to help coordinate with other supervisors or with the state, and having them problem solve on behalf of the team. And you can't always solve every problem right away, but having that kind of good faith on the part of the senior level is very, very helpful. So some of the things that are essential in putting this kind of program together, again, are having that kind of consistent ongoing community education. So that's where tying in with things like the Suicide Coalition and the substance abuse providers, they can help carry that message in addition to the efforts that you're making with your own team. And then before a program gets started, you want to be sure that everybody in your own agency knows what you're doing, so that from the time you get that call, they know what to do with it. Also, having a team of clinicians, and in a rural community, obviously that can be a smaller team. It could potentially be a team that crosses counties, where if you don't have adequate capacity, you can pool resources. And it needs to include the medical, supported employment and education, and clinical services all together, all working off of the same plan, and meeting on a weekly basis to review everybody who's receiving services. Making sure that the right people are getting to the team, so that really requires you to pay attention to the internal procedures. So when somebody calls, or if somebody's identified in the agency, there needs to be somebody kind of at that supervisory level who's really working to make sure that people get to the team, because we've seen that happen a few times with rural communities where people have just been kind of randomly assigned as they come in the door, and by the time they figure out that there's a psychosis going on, they already have a relationship with a counselor, and now you've got 3 or 4 different counselors all serving individuals, but none of them have been, or only one of them has been through the training, and they're not really operating as a team, and you can see people disengaging and things kind of breaking down. Flexibility again, and persistent engagement efforts. So these are folks who are, they are often, they often require some creativity and some thoughtfulness about how to engage, and you often have to problem solve with the family members to figure out how kind of what approach are you going to take, and so that needs to be supported, because at that point the person has not yet sought treatment or agreed to treatment, but the family has. So you have to kind of create a mechanism to allow that to happen. And then the comprehensive assessment, and then there are a number of different pieces of things that all tie in together. Some of which you can, that may be really easy, and some of which may require some additional training for the staff and additional resources. We do talk a lot about trying to really focus on culturally informed practices. There's a lot of variation across communities and counties, and the services really have to reflect that. There's kind of a core set of skills that we encourage teams to develop, including motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and shared decision making. Differential diagnosis is another kind of important skill area. And then, there's some other kind of assessment, treatment planning things that we care about in terms of making sure it's strengths-based, really paying attention to the risks involved, and making sure that it's person-centered and comprehensive. And there's some specific prescribing practices around this being a young age. These are agents that cause a lot of potential side effects. There's a lot of issues around how we talk to people in order to keep them engaged. So all of these things have tools associated with them, training associated with them, and whoever is going to jump on board with doing this kind of work has to become familiar with all of these different things. So I don't know how we're doing in terms of our ability for people to actually talk or put things in chat boxes. I'll open it up, but I know you may be having a little bit of difficulty with the communication. I do think that in rural communities, there are a number of things that are really kind of distinct and significant as far as the benefits for people who are experiencing psychosis. Just having that kind of sense of history, the social connectedness. I was talking to somebody in one of our teeny tiny towns recently who was talking about how in their town, if somebody is acting strangely, people actually generally know the person, and they are able to, they treat them with a lot of kindness and kind of help kind of move them to the place where they need to be. And so with some education and some organization around the community, there's a lot of, there can be a lot of acceptance. And I know there's also often a lot of stigma kind of based on ignorance, but having folks who actually know you and who are willing to provide you with a role, whether it's helping out around the property, or giving somebody a job, those things are incredibly important. And of course, the local, I'm sure you guys all in your mental health centers, you're kind of taking all comers and dealing with such a range of issues, and so that makes you really great kind of generalists, and I think really contributes to problem solving, as well as having kind of the ability to serve the whole population, or the willingness to, and recognizing that you can't do it on your own, so you really have to bring in those natural resources. And of course, some of the challenges that we also experience are, sometimes there are some mistrust issues. I see that not only in terms of mistrust toward government, but also sometimes mistrust toward the local mental health center if there's been some history there. Staff recruitment is probably the biggest issue we run into, as people are starting new programs, trying to get people to move there. I have one program I'm working with that's been actually trying to hire for about a year now, and they do have a tuition waiver available, but I think really, we do have a national kind of national listserv, and so the more we can help get the word out about recruitment efforts, if you're trying to bring people to your community, or really looking at who do you have locally that could step up and participate. I think one of the big challenges is just that you don't have as many people that you're trying to serve, and the learning curve involved is pretty significant. You also have to set aside a fair amount of time. So it becomes really, really important to have strong clinical supervision in order to keep that time protected and keep that accountability going, and also to encourage the ongoing learning process. And of course, long distances and weather, become kind of big issues as well. So in our rural communities, we tend to have really large travel budgets, and we use a lot of phone kind of work as well. So, some of the things that we've observed that seem to really help, again, are having a really good clinical supervisor who's going to consistently say, we really need to set time aside to do this, to focus on this. Also, something that seems to have made a really big difference is if we have a clinician who is really committed to the community. And I know that's that's not a given, but if you have somebody who's been there for a while and it isn't going anywhere, I generally prefer having somebody like that versus somebody who's just shown up in the community for the first time and is not really committed. Because what we see happening quite often when we recruit for these positions is that they don't stick around, whereas the folks who have been there and are really kind of rooted in the community tend to stick around a lot longer. Having a minimal amount of time set aside, so we generally say like about 25% time, 10 hours a week for the lead person is really important, because they're doing so many things. They're doing community education and outreach, engagement, vocational support, family support. So in rural communities, quite often we're looking at having to consolidate some of the functions in order to get enough critical mass of time so the person can really learn the job and really do it well. And then, again, having that ongoing accountability, and that usually really comes with the clinical supervision combined with having some kind of a relationship at the state level where you're looking at data and looking at kind of ongoing community education and whether we're actually doing what we've said we're going to do. And then having those routine meetings, really every week with the folks who are serving the individuals. Also in terms of rural strategies, with a population size of 500,000, if there's a way to develop kind of a center of expertise where they can become kind of coaches and mentors for the rest of the state, looking at ways to do kind of joint community education rather than everybody doing everything on their own. Again, if you're going to do training, opening it up to the whole state. I was talking to Ari about a program in Idaho that I'm working with right now that is really close to the Wyoming border. So there's some potential for cross-state work as well, and we're also doing webinars and things like that. So those can be opened up across communities as well as potentially to folks who are in programs other than the early psychosis programs, in order to really start moving things towards strengths-focused planning or CBT or motivational interviewing, some of those core practices and skills that really cross populations. Again, looking at ways to combine across communities, across counties, so that you don't have to have all the resources in your community. Really looking at how to integrate those informal supports very intentionally and provide them with the education that they need so they can be effective. Using the internet, and then having opportunities for folks to actually get on the phone and problem solve with each other. For communities that don't have any resources at all, in addition to what they normally would have, some things that you can do just to kind of get the ball rolling is to start with making sure that you're giving priority access to folks who are experiencing psychosis, recognizing that this is a group that has some different accommodation needs, and that you might have to be more proactive, more flexible, just within your existing program. Giving staff permission to kind of do what it takes, take more of a strengths-focused approach rather than being really restrictive, and then just looking at trying to coordinate more, kind of pulling people together to create one team that focuses on both teens and adults. That's kind of a really helpful thing, because it's often this will start at the age of 17 or 16, and so being able to provide that continuity in one team is very, very helpful. And then looking at where the resources are going right now, and is there a way to redirect those. So probably the biggest example of that is all these folks who are ending up in the hospital, and there's a lot of money that goes into hospitals. And so if there's a way to start tapping into even a portion of those dollars, or thinking of it as a hospital diversion program, sometimes that can open up new resources. And generally, to get these programs going, there's some things that you have to kind of add on that you don't have now, and so that becomes the place where you are looking for the federal block grant or additional dollars. So having a master's level clinician available, the community ed, outreach, supported employment and education, adequate access to medical. Those are all things that often rural communities really have to have some subsidy to be able to obtain. And then we also are really pretty committed to both peer support and occupational therapy. Peer support for us is becoming more and more formalized, but even having informal peer support is incredibly helpful. And occupational therapy we just find really helpful, because they're really good at helping people get unstuck and understanding some of the underlying issues. So again, that's the kind of thing that could potentially be provided through a telemedicine kind of approach, or through some consultation, or having one person who could travel potentially. So in terms of getting a program started, we talked a little bit about the leadership and the importance of buy-in, as well as bringing those partners to the table. You also have to look at what geographic population are you going to serve. So to just say we're going to do a program is not quite enough. You have to figure out who's eligible for it. So most of our programs in Oregon define their geographic eligibility based on the county. So if you're in Marion County, you're eligible for the Marion County program. But also if you go to college in Eugene, outside of the county, and your family is still in Marion County, then you would stay eligible for the Marion program. And we've actually created a network within Oregon where people can be served in both places. So they might get services through a team where they're going to college, and then the local team will also serve their family, and then we'll provide them with support when they come back from college. And then there's a whole list of decisions around eligibility. You know, do you serve, are you only trying to focus on schizophrenia? Are you wanting to include bipolar spectrum? We've actually expanded out to psychosis risk syndrome, although I know the federal funding that's come out is not, you know, it has to go to first episode. But there's a set of decisions that you know, you have to kind of go through to figure these things out. And then, you know, how are you going to structure your program? How's it going to be financed? You know, how are you going to do your outreach? Coming up with a name for your program early on is really important. So as you get started, you might have one agency really taking the lead on getting the, you know, starting to build the infrastructure, and they're going to adopt a name, and then ultimately, as you go statewide, hopefully that becomes the name that everybody around the state is using. And you know, sometimes you might be adopting an existing model, so you know, some folks are adopting the Navigate model or the On Track model, so they're using that name. But a lot of states are creating their own names. So for example, I'm working with Kentucky right now, and they named their program I Hope. And the state of Washington has named their program New Journeys. You know, so that becomes really helpful because it helps you kind of build the visibility. You can go to the legislature, they start to become familiar with the name, they start to think about investing in the process. And then, of course, you know, thinking about how are you going to provide ongoing training, accountability, quality improvement. And I know Ari's already thinking about that because she was talking about people submitting data. So Ari, you want to talk a little bit about kind of where things go from here on your end, and then we can open it up for people's thoughts about either questions or ideas about kind of next steps or things that could happen to help move this process forward.
Okay, so what I was saying was that each year, which I think I mentioned this before, we do requests for applications for treatment contract funding. And so this year, we're in the process this week, actually, of reviewing those applications and recommending decisions to our senior administrator and administrators here within the division. And so what I was told was that the goal was to let those people who applied for the funding, to let them know whether or not they will receive the funding by March 7th. And so then at that point, we would start working on developing the requirements into a contract with whoever is selected for that funding for first episode psychosis treatment. And I guess what I could say is we did have, I was excited, we did have 3 providers who did apply for the funding, so that was good.
Great. Okay. And so Ari, will you then be continuing to provide state leadership around this as it gets implemented?
Yeah, it's actually going to be a team of us that will be doing that. So I'll be the primary point of contact, but I'll have assistance from Maggie, who you met on the first call. She is our quality management and outcomes unit manager.
Okay, so shall we open it up then? Do people have any questions or any ideas about strategies that might be helpful? It sounds like there will be at least one provider that will actually be funded to start a program, and that's kind of the beginning place.
Yeah.
Right. And feel free to either speak, and if you don't get a response, that probably means you're muted, or put right into the chat or the question box.
And Janet
Right.
says, with so few peer specialists and so few persons served, how do rural providers engage peer specialists into helping to instill help and engage people to seek services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that one way of approaching it might be to try to combine resources. So, for example, we have a really great young adult leadership council here that's gotten pretty involved at the national level, and there are now some kind of national groups of peers who are really interested in being a resource to communities. So there may be some kind of web-based connections that we could make. I used to, early on, before I had a lot of folks who I could turn to, I used to do workshops periodically where I would invite people to come and speak. So I would invite people from the Portland metro area, or somebody. I've even had people come from out of state, just to kind of give that kind of role model to people. There's a lot on the internet now. The On Track USA folks have a set of videos that they've put up that are all folks who are who have lived experience. And then the other thing is that I found that often people who are older can actually be really effective peer mentors for younger people. So I wouldn't necessarily try to restrict it to young adults. If you have anybody in your community who's a really good kind of role model, as far as recovery, tapping into them and asking if they'd be willing to be part of the team. So I think it's a little harder in the beginning, and it can take some time. We're at a place now in Oregon where we have lots of people who are available to provide peer support, and lots of people graduating from our program who want to become peer support specialists. So it gets easier, I think, with time. With a rural community, you may never get to the point where you have as much of a critical mass, but all you really need is one or two, who are really effective, and then you can kind of combine efforts across the state as well to try to build that capacity.
Tamara, I just sent you a couple of ideas, which I sent to you in the chat box. Can you see that?
So, yeah. Okay, so a couple of ideas. Have peer specialists and other consumers lead mental health first aid and other community leadership. Absolutely. Allow for additional training for peer specialists to gain additional information related to this task, and then get insurance, Medicare, and additional Medicaid funding for peer specialists. Yeah, so I know in Oregon you can bill Medicaid for peer support specialists, and there's a certification program. I don't know if you guys have that at this point in Wyoming, but it's definitely possible to do. So any other ideas, questions?
Janet says we have Medicaid funding / certification for peer specialists.
Yeah, so I think if you can build peer support in from the beginning, it definitely is a lot more effective. If you get the right person in the position. So I would definitely encourage you to do that if you're able to.
That's all we have for now.
Okay. All right. Well, it was great to talk to everybody, and I am assuming that Ari will be, letting everybody know kind of where things are going. It's I think it's to the degree that you all are interested in early psychosis work and want to stay involved. As I said, we have this learning collaborative that we've started, and there's a group called PepNet, which is a national networking group of folks who are interested in this work. And of course, within the state of Wyoming, I'm sure that you guys will be developing some opportunities as well. So I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the information about the Learning Collaborative work, because that is open to anyone who is wanting to move forward with this kind of thing. And we'll look forward to continuing to work together to make this happen for our young adults and teenagers, because it's a really exciting thing and very, very rewarding. I appreciate your attention over the series of webinars, and I'm excited to see the interest that's there. So thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you, Tamara.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tamara.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, and please do either let myself or Tamara or Ari know if you have any questions. And I will be, the survey will be coming out with an email after the webinar is finished. Please do fill that out, and then that way we can make sure that we send the presentations when they're complete for you to be able to review on your own time. So again, thank you so much, Tamara and Ari, for a very successful series of webinars. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Jenny.
Take care.
Thank you.